I call Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I too would like to acknowledge those officials that undertook that early participation in negotiation in this agreement. I give them credit for the fantastic work that they did. That does not actually preclude our continuing opposition to this legislation. Part 1 enables our participation in this infrastructure bank, and many of the speakers, including the Minister, have spoken of one of the benefits being the ability to influence economic factors and connectivity to the market. So the arguments given are increased economic development in the Asia region. We've heard that repeatedly. Supported increased economic integration, augments New Zealand's existing relationships. So let's take a reality check here and just stop and look at what the officials actually provided this House in terms of information. So the reality is there is nothing in this legislation and nothing in the appendices attached to this, Schedule 8, which says, it actually specifically says there will be no investment in New Zealand, Mr Chairman. So New Zealanders aren't seeking or will not seek for investment to be undertaken in New Zealand under this legislation, nor, and it specifically says, will the investment bank itself actually invest in New Zealand. So the question then was asked, well, what is the benefit to New Zealand of signing up to this trade agreement? And we've heard a lot of lovely intangibles, but the reality is, and this is the reality, government officials never undertook a financial impact statement or an analysis of the benefit of this trade agreement, this financial agreement with New Zealand, because from the outset they established there would be no financial or negligible benefit to the New Zealand economy. Those were the government's own official words, Mr Chairman. So that is the reality of the situation that this House is in today. That is the reality of the contribution being given here. It sounds lovely when you hear the words from some of the members today about the impact on New Zealand, but that is not the reality. The officials themselves have said so. So New Zealand First has questioned the economic impact from the outset. The argument has also been around influence, but we would also point out, sir, that China, for example, will trade with New Zealand without a free trade agreement. In fact, trade with China was growing exponentially before a free trade agreement because China wanted what we had. They wanted our commodities and they were prepared to come in, negotiate and work with New Zealanders to do that. So businesses and New Zealand will continue to build relationships with China and the ASEAN communities. We have, as Mr Goff so rightly pointed out, we have these free trade agreements with the Republic of Korea, with China, our agreements with the ASEAN community. That won't stop because this government, for example, would go before them and say, look, we're willing to help you write this infrastructure financial agreement because we think we have something to contribute, but actually we can't afford to give you the money. I think that would have been fair and reasonable, and we wouldn't have broken friendships or undermined our relationships. If we'd said honestly, look, we're up to $80 to $100 billion worth of government debt, we've sold assets, we're supposed to be paying for our own hospitals, our own schools, and investing in our own community. Look, the reality is we can't contribute that minuscule sum to make this work for you. The other issue I have, and it's actually a question for the Minister, if I can find my notes, Mr Chair, was around our participation and our level of influence. The reality is, and I think it was Mr Parker, the Honourable Mr Parker, said we have a 0.64 percentage of share in this bank. He's bang on. My calculation was 0.66. It was even more generous. But if you go into the appendices, I ask a question specifically of the Minister. Our participation on the board is dependent on those rules, and one of those rules says, and oh no, here it is, Schedule B, Part 2A, says we have to have 6% share in this bank in order to be a participative member.
Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr.